Hello, hello, welcome back. I am your host, Dr. Colin Campbell, and welcome to the Capital Press Club Legacy Podcast, episode number 16. Now, we usually start out with this day in Black history, and this is a dark day in Black history. Back in 1919, this was the last day of a series of race riots during the summer of 1919 that they called the Red Summer. The last day, on August 3rd, in 1919, a boy by the name of Eugene Williams was swimming in Lake Michigan. Apparently, he swam over the line of separation to the white side of where white people swam. And so that sparked and agitated white observers who started stoning him basically while he was swimming. Well, Williams, the 17-year-old, later drowned, and that sparked another fury of race riots in that area, even though the initial race riots started in July 27th, I believe, back then, for other reasons. But on this last day, because of the drowning of Williams and because he was stoned to death, basically, it sparked race riots. The National Guard had to step in. Approximately 38 people were killed. Hundreds, more than 300 people were injured. Thousands of people displaced, mostly black people. And this went on to create further tensions in that area. So, again, a dark day in black history, the summer of 1919, which they called the Red Summer, which was encapsulated a series of race riots, usually sparked by agitated white folk looking to harm black people. This is the type of news and information that they don't want to tell you in schools, but we must remember this type of information for fear that we could return to those days. Okay, enough for that moment of Black history. I wanted to talk about our topic of the day, and for that, I'm definitely bringing in my man in front of the camera and behind the camera, Derek Kenny. Derek, how you doing, man? This week they had NABJ 2024, and that hit
Hey,
some national headlines, didn't it? As
it
they
sure
hosted
did.
former,
It sure did. If they weren't first and foremost in the minds of America, they are now. Like they are a household name at least for the week or two in America, good or bad. And I don't think there's a saying. There's no such thing as bad press. No such thing as bad
right?
press, and this is probably evident of that. And hopefully it works out well for NABJ, which I will say on the record that is a jewel for the development and upliftment of African American journalists for what the last 50 years, starting in the 70s,
Yeah,
all
it
the way through
started,
now.
I believe,
Yeah,
in 1973 or 74. And the reason
yeah,
why it started, and I'm glad you've prefaced that a little bit, Derek, because of the Kerner Commission. The Kerner Commission report that came out in the late 60s, I believe, during the Nixon administration, talked about why there was so much social unrest, socio-political unrest in some of the major cities in the US. And that's because of the dearth of representation of Black Americans in our media. So NABJ was formed in the early 70s. A group of founders who wanted to collect and and gather members of the black press to speak to serious issues and, of course, to interview some of the newsmakers of that time. And that's when they started interviewing some of the presidents and dignitaries that many white journalists already had access to for decades. So bringing on the former president and inviting him to come speak to NABJ, especially during a political election year, was part and parcel for the types of services and the types of tradition that NABJ has had for several years now. So it wasn't anything new, even though it was controversial that they invited him. Derek, my first question is, should they have invited him? Being the former president who he is, there were a lot of people who felt he should not have been invited in the first place. What do you think about that?
of course. I think it makes sense to invite the former president as well as both candidates for president of the United States of America. When you just mentioned that the one of the purposes of the organization, at least initially, was to provide journalists with direct access to two of the top newsmakers in the country right now, like Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump. Yeah, it made sense, and a lot of people, I think, in other organizations I've seen over the years that were traditionally African American, NAACP, National Urban League, invite both candidates, whether you like them or not. Both candidates were invited because no matter what is no matter how you feel about whether you're Republican or Democratic, at the end of the day, one of those two people will be responsible for the welfare and protection of your families. So it only makes sense that you hear from both candidates, and it makes sense. It makes very good sense, even though in this case, Trump has not done a good job as a person that's running for a popular vote to endear himself with a lot of people across certain lines of separation.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people said that the reason why he came was not really to reach across the partisan lines, so to speak, and try to endear himself to Black society, but rather to gin up his base, to show that he appeared in front of a group of Black folk where it probably would not be the most genuine, generous, or compassionate crowd. Some people called it the Lion's Den, and that he was able to make an appearance there and show that, hey, I am willing to at least appear in front of these people. So you can't really label me as racist or bigoted because
Mm,
I'm here, right?
yeah.
But it wasn't really to bring people over and say, okay, listen, this is what I'm doing for Black folk, and even if you had doubts over whether or not you wanted to vote for me, this is why you can vote for me. This is why you could feel safe voting for me. There were some elements during that interview where he talked about some of the things that he felt that where he made progress for Black people, especially with the First Step Act, securing some money for historically Black colleges and universities. Of course, that was also controversial because of the way that he did it, was setting up funds for a certain amount of time, but it did not really factor in inflation, cost of living adjustments, all of those other things that usually are adjusted and modified as money is being requested through over the course of several years. So that's something that our viewers can research on their own, but that is one of the points that he made. But before we get into a little bit more of the interview, I did want to talk about the start of the interview, which I know you have queued and ready to go, I believe, Derek. But the way that the interview started, it was 35 minutes delayed, according to the former president. Now, what's interesting is he blamed technical issues on behalf of NABJ for the delay. Other people said that it was he who initiated the delay because he wanted a certain format or certain questions asked or something like that, or he wanted the vice president Kamala Harris to be there. There's some confusion over that. Regardless, it seems that ABC's Rachel Scott, one of the lead interviewers, one of the lead reporters there, went right in on him. And Derek, do you have that queued? Can we play that?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Let's see if I can have it. See if we can have it go. And this is
Okay.
courtesy of CNN. The URL is there, and hopefully
Mm-hmm.
Start
you
by
can hear this.
addressing the elephant in the room, sir. A lot of people did not think it was appropriate for you to be here today. You have pushed false claims about some of your rivals, from Nikki Haley to former President Barack Obama, saying that they were not born in the United States, which is not true. You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to go back to where they came from. You have used words like animal and rabid to describe Black district attorneys. You've attacked Black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort. So my question, sir, now that you are asking Black supporters to vote for you, why should Black voters trust you after you have used language like that?
All
Well,
right, so we have it. That was the opening to the opening to the interview. Now, unpopular
okay.
opinion, and Derek, you may disagree with this, but
Yeah.
just from a repertorial practice, when you invite somebody to a panel, regardless of if you like them or not,
Hmm.
as reporters, as journalists, we're supposed to be impartial. I'm kind of from that old school,
Yeah.
right?
You are
Where
supposed to be
you
impartial.
interview them, you
Yes.
can ask them tough questions,
Hmm.
but you're supposed to be impartial. I would have welcomed him. Thank you for
Hmm.
joining us at NABJ 2024. Uh, and then go into some people didn't think that you should be here, but we're happy you're here to answer some of
Right.
our questions.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining
Yeah.
us. Then go in on him if you want, but to not even
Yeah.
welcome him and just kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, he was the former president of the United States.
You
I'm
know.
not trying to defend him. I'm
Mhm.
not trying to say that he needed protecting or anything like that. I'm just saying, as far as a professional practice as a
Right.
journalist,
Yeah.
if I'm inviting somebody that I'm going to
Mhm.
interview, I always just welcome them to the show, or excuse me,
Yeah.
welcome them to the interview. Thank them for joining us for the interview, and then make them feel, I guess, a little comfortable before asking them some of the tough questions.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm from the same school of thought, and I'll take it a step further. I believe that the American president, whether you like him or not, former presidents included, demand a certain amount of respect, whether or not they are worthy of that as individuals because of their conduct or what they've said. Um, the American president commands a certain measure of respect, and I don't know if former president or President Trump always gets that, and I don't know, and I won't make a judgment based off of this one situation of whether or not he got respect from NABJ because that's not my role, my call. But I will say that the American president, like we're not, and past presidents deserve an amount of respect and decorum. And I think when Obama was president, we really fought hard to make sure that he received the proper amount of respect and decorum and treatment from people that found him to be lacking as president for whatever reasons. So I don't. I want to make sure that we're consistent. Like he was our president of the United States of America. He represented all Americans, and as professionals, and this is where we need to start talking about what we're looking at. These are professional journalists. These are not three ladies that have walked into a room and sat down to talk to Donald Trump. These are three professional journalists, and so we need to treat it as such. And by virtue of that, I do think there's a way that you do bring in a guest to whatever program you have, whether you are talking to Gandhi or Martin Luther King or you're talking to Ted Bundy. You don't necessarily wear your animosity or your personal feelings on your sleeve. You don't start off with judgments of them. Not saying that she started off with judgments. I'm saying, but you ask a question, an open-ended question, maybe two open-ended questions to get him talking. And if he refutes that, or if he says, "I don't know what you're talking about," then you provide information, substantive information that you provided initially to support that. I thought that she could have done a better job of asking that first question. I thought she could have done a better job of welcoming him and making him feel comfortable. Uh, and again, he's the former American president of the United States of America, and he deserves
Right.
that, whether as an individual you like him or not, or you respect the way he carries himself or speaks or not. And again, we're nonpartisan. I'm not a Republican, and I'm not saying that I would vote Democrat because I'm not going to share that today, right? But I do say that every American president deserves respect from
Yeah.
professionals.
I was going
So
to say, regardless of how he carries himself, and I think
yeah,
that's an important point you made, we as journalists still need to comport ourselves in a professional manner. I do think that some people feel that he shouldn't be respected because he hasn't been a respectful leader. I
yeah,
understand. But as journalists, especially journalists who are supposed to be impartial, we should also carry ourselves with a level of professionalism, regardless of our personal politics or regardless of how the interviewee carries themselves. So that was one thing. Now, it's interesting. I didn't really talk about that part with you earlier, so we kind of agree on that. Another part that might be a little bit controversial is not seeing any men on the stage there. I know that some of our lady viewers might, chide me for this, but it would have been interesting to see at least one brother up there, right? Because there are a lot of brothers who are journalists.
yeah,
The panelists were Rachel Scott; she was the lead correspondent or interviewer there. There was also Harris Faulkner from Fox News. So we knew that the former president was going to get some softball questions there. And then the moderator, Katia Semaphore, I believe. She was supposed to be the moderator, although I don't know if she really moderated. It seemed that she just
yeah,
kind of asked questions sort of like Rachel Scott and Harris Faulkner. So I don't know how that was set up, but it would have been nice to see a brother up there ask maybe a couple questions that deal with Black society, but maybe a question or two from the male perspective as well, challenging the former president on
I
the
would,
uh, economic zones, I think he called them, and
yeah,
mass incarceration, things like that, where you
I,
have a plethora of Black men who are
yeah,
living behind bars right now,
yeah.
voting rights taken
Mhm.
away from them, all of that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that was missing, and I don't think black men were missing because I think the women there were professionals. I think as long as you got three professionals there that are able and demonstrated themselves to be true professionals and by their peers, which I believe NABJ is qualified to do. So them putting three qualified professionals on stage, whether they're men or women or whatever, I think is fine. What I think was missing for something at this level is some type of engagement from the leadership of NABJ to set the tone for this the interview, because it wasn't just an opportunity to interview the president; it was an opportunity for this organization, which is founded on certain principles, to welcome the president of the United States. So I think the leader of the organization should have been noticeably present, and maybe he should have helped to welcome the former president or president. I think you call former. Let's can we establish this now? Do you call former like leaders, mayors,
Yeah, that's
governors,
been the
presidents,
rule. Is
etc.,
just to
as
say
president, right?
president.
So
Yeah, that's
so
been,
yeah,
kind of like an informal rule to just say
yeah,
president once a president becomes
yeah.
president.
You're
But I think
yeah,
because of the controversy over the election,
yeah,
and the president saying that he is still the president despite losing the election, I
yeah.
think there are a
It's
lot of
tough.
journalists being more careful now to
Yeah,
refer to him as former president. And also
right.
because he's running for president
Yeah,
again. So they have to
yeah,
make that distinction. But I think that it is a good point that Ken Lemon, the president of NABJ, could have been the person to welcome the former president
yeah,
on the panel, and not necessarily ask questions, but yeah, that would have been, I think, a nice
yeah,
touch, and
yeah.
again a show of professionalism. But yeah, I still think it would have been nice to see a brother up there as well,
Right,
to just show, even if it's demonstrative,
right.
that yeah, brothers are doing journalism too.
And,
You know
and
what I
and I
mean?
will say that these
I think,
days black men are
remember,
conspicuously absent sometimes, and I'm not sure
yeah,
if that is,
we have to remember
yeah,
this. These images
yeah,
are also for younger folk too, and
yeah,
especially if you're Black youth, which includes young Black men,
yeah,
are not seeing themselves represented. The same argument that women had.
right,
So, and so I'm not saying there should have been more men than women. I'm
yeah,
not saying that there should have been all men. I am not saying that at all. I
right,
know there somebody watching this will probably say that. I'm just saying it would have been nice to have one. Even if they added, a fourth interviewer or substituted one and had more women than men. Cool. But it would have been nice just to see some slight representation of a brother up there,
yeah,
brother journalist. That's all I'm saying.
right,
But yeah, so then, okay, now let's jump into the interview a bit. Definitely contentious because the former president seemed to be a bit agitated by the first question and then, kind of screamed, what's the word? Squealed about it a bit and complained that the interview started 35 minutes late, almost blaming the women there for the technical difficulties of which they had nothing to do with. They're just
yeah,
interviewers.
and
They don't have anything to do with the audio visual, with the
right,
AV
yeah,
equipment. So that was a little strange. And then also we have the big point of
hmm,
when the president talked about Vice President Kamala Harris turning Black. And what's interesting
yeah,
here is I was
yeah,
listening to, I believe it was Smirkanish on CNN, and he said that in his recap of what happened, he said that the former president said that Vice President Harris was Indian and then took a turn and then asserted her blackness. And I said, no, 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 no. That's not what he said. He said that she turned black, like it's something that magically happens at a certain point in your life. You just turn black, right? Your exist is one way, and then you wake up one day and all of a sudden you're black. Like the way he phrased it was so awkward but also offensive. Like you just turn your blackness on and off. I think that's what a lot of people had a problem with. And did you see that part, DK, about him saying that the vice president Kamala Harris turned black?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's just a shot. He just took a shot, like, and I'm not surprised by Trump anymore. We've seen Trump now for like the last 10 years, and then even before that, we saw him as a celebrity reality star with his own show, and even before that, as a billionaire, and then many years ago, persecuting those innocent black men who were accused of harming that woman many moons
You're
ago.
talking
So
about
we've
Central Park
so
Five,
so
now
we've
also referred to as the Exonerated Five.
exonerated five exactly, and so we've known Donald Trump for years, and part of the time, he was kind of a hip hop legend. Like he was part of the things that some urban youth or hip hop artists aspire to in
Yeah,
their
he was
lyrics, right?
cool. He was
Yeah,
cool.
but
He was talked
that
about in hip hop
yeah,
music. He was
and
kind of iconic because of
yeah,
he showed the money that he had
right,
and his
yeah. So
billionaire
we
status.
So we,
Yeah.
we know him. He'll say stuff on the side of the neck and say things that are inappropriate or things that are disrespectful. He's not classy. He's not a classy, um, above board, respectful person. I think he talks from the hip. I'm not sure if he listens to. I'm sure he has the best PR people in the world. I'm not sure if he ever listens to everything they tell him to do. Um, but he's smart. You have to give him credit for being smart because he won the presidential election. Every 4 years, all the powers that be across the United States and across the world try to get that seat. And when Donald Trump won the first time, no one thought, even to the election day, thought that, I won't say no one, but he became president. So he's
Yeah, there
not
were
a
some
dumb.
people who predicted that he
Yeah,
was going to win.
he's
Yeah.
not stupid. So in a way, he might be redefining how you run a presidential campaign, how you appeal to voters, because it looks crass and it's somewhat base in his conduct, the way he conducts himself, where he doesn't have the what you expect, the level of dignity that that you would require. I think we would require from a president. He doesn't necessarily have that, but
Right.
he's won. He's
He
winning,
won.
and
Let's get back to
so
let's get back to the
yeah.
interviewers. How did they do though? How did they do? We
Uh,
critiqued Rachel Scott off the top, but
yeah.
how did the rest do? How did Harris Faulkner do? How did Kadia do
I think
when it came to questioning the former president?
I think the body language will I think speaks for itself. I think they were fine. They were okay. I think other than the first question, the follow up questions seemed to be relatively okay. I think the one thing they did well, which I think was an upgrade from the CNN treatment of the debate, they had a fact checker involved, and I thought
Yeah,
that was really good to have.
yeah. You could go to a
Yeah,
URL
yeah.
and then to a website, and then it was
Now the
like
way
real
they
time.
introduced the fact checking
Yeah,
before talking to Donald Trump and before that long question, I think was not appropriately timed. I think again there could have been someone that set the stage for welcome the president, set the stage for how this interview will be conducted, who's participating, and what type of we can expect in terms of the question and answer. And then even address the elephant in the room, which was uh, where's Kamala Harris? Because Trump immediately jumped on that, right? So I thought,
yeah. And so, where was
yeah,
Kamala Harris? So it seems that there was that was one of the major dust ups at
yeah,
NABJ this year was that led to the resignation of, I believe, one of the convention coordinators,
yeah,
that they wouldn't take Kamala Harris's comments through a Zoom call. And this week she had to attend the funeral of Sheila Jackson Lee
yeah.
of Texas, right?
Oh
Who
yeah,
passed away from pancreatic cancer. She lost the battle
legendary.
with cancer. I did see her at the airport earlier this year, and I
Mm,
just missed getting a picture of her. She boarded the plane, but I was like, she looks really thin. So I was thinking
yeah,
Ozempic, actually, but
yeah.
no, obviously. She was dealing with something much more serious. Anyway, the point is that Harris couldn't make it because she was attending that funeral. She also had a major fundraiser that she was attending that was already pre-planned, so she couldn't swing through. A lot of people thought that was a slight against Vice President Harris, but scheduling problems happen
Yeah.
like this a lot. And of course, NABJ wasn't planning for Harris to be running for president, right? When this whole thing was put together, it was always Biden, 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 up till the
Right.
last minute, like a week before NABJ. And I think it was very hard for them to pivot because they had already
Right.
put all this programming in place, and she couldn't attend the same time that Trump could have been there. So
Yeah.
I don't think that it was a
Mhm.
failure of NABJ.
No, and I think they were consistent. I think Trump mentioned that uh, they said they wouldn't have any Zooms or whatever, and they didn't have Zoom for Kamala Harris, and I think those are pretty difficult to do to insert that. Number one, when you have the president of the United States visit anywhere and the program starts only 30 minutes late, that's great because all the technical run-throughs and all the technology supporting the event and all the people supporting the event are thrown off by hours because dogs have to come through, sniff everywhere, people have to be vetted, IDs have to be checked. There's a whole disruptive process that happens when you have a presidential candidate and a former president come in place. So his complaint about 35 minutes late, that's actually great. I think that's great.
Let
I
me
think they
ask
did
you:
great only being 35 minutes late
do you
to
think
actually
that
have a
was
major
like kind
function.
of a do you think that was a slight kind of talking about BP time, CP
Yeah,
time?
of African American organizations not being professional or not being able to handle things or being late. Yeah, I thought it was a slight. But I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if he meant it as a slight, but I believe a lot of people may perceive it that way. I
Right.
think he was
Yeah.
just a grumpy older man that is taking shots now because he's being defensive, and he's a very
Yeah.
defensive guy. Like he's so defensive. I mean, I don't know if he would have if his first words would have come out the same way if the question was phrased differently. I
I
don't
That's what I
know.
think
Yeah,
too. Because there was one point where I think it was Kadia talked about um, comments that his vice presidential candidate said, calling women cat ladies, and she was referencing single women who do not have children, and
mm,
she brought up the part that he was also divorced. He's like, there are women who are divorced, kind of like you. And you heard groans from the crowd, almost like she was throwing shade that he was divorced. But he even said, well, at least she asked the question politely. It wasn't
yeah,
done in a
hmm
mean-spirited
yeah,
way. So I do think he does express some sensitivity in the way that people communicate with him. And that speaks to your point, Derek, about would he have said the same thing the same way had he been welcomed? And in my opinion, not yours, I'm not going
yeah,
to speak for you, but in my opinion,
yeah.
professionally
Mm,
introduced and welcomed to sit on the panel. And I
yeah.
think that's good. Harris Faulkner, looking at, we've spoken about Rachel Scott, we've spoken about Kadia Semaphore. Harris Faulkner, in my opinion, threw him a lot of softball questions. He could have that's every other Tuesday on Fox News. I think she could have done a better job in challenging him on questions. I think that as a former president of the United States, he should be experiencing interrogative rigor, even if it's from a Fox News host or correspondent or whatever capacity. Harris Faulkner,
Yeah.
a revered reporter, by the way.
Mm.
I'm not trying to diminish her
Now,
accomplishments.
now,
I'm just not sure what specific capacity she serves on Fox. I think she's
I,
a show host, actually.
I do want to give NABJ their kudos for that because I'm not necessarily so I was indifferent when it came to whether or not you need to have a man on stage. You have three people on stage. You have an organization of thousands of qualified journalists to sit on stage with Trump. Um, the fact that they had a journalist from a conservative news organization on stage was a bit I think good for them, because you do want to have a balance, at least a perceived balance, of people interviewing the former president or the president, Trump. So I thought that was really good by NABJ to actually have her there. So kudos to
Yeah,
them for that. Yeah.
and that's not something that's unusual. I remember in 2017 when Trump couldn't or didn't want to, I don't know what the situation was, but he was not at the NABJ conference, and Omarosa Manigault was there as his representative. That also got a little bit heated.
Yeah.
Probably not as much national or international attention because it didn't really involve the president himself.
Yeah.
But there was a testy exchange between Omarosa and Ed Gordon, who was the moderator on that panel, and that made that was kind of somewhat of a kerfuffle for the National Association of Black Journalists when you saw
Yeah.
the optics of Ed Gordon kind of approaching Omarosa, who was sitting down, almost the way, almost not the same, but almost the way that some people analyzed the body posture of Rachel Scott sitting next to the former president. There was even one point where it looked like he grabbed her water and tightened the lid. Now, that's what some people are saying. I don't, it looked to me like he accidentally grabbed her water, even though he had his water bottle right next to him. But it is kind of interesting. He reached over, grabbed her water bottle when she wasn't looking, and then manipulated the lid, but didn't even drink from it. He put it back. I thought that was a little strange. Again, we're talking about the communications of communication.
Mhm.
There's some nonverbals there. Even time. I did want to say this: monochronism, polychronism. I'm not going to get into all the details, but
Okay.
it's the way that we interpret time.
Yeah.
And when somebody is monochronistic, they look at time very specifically. So if someone told the former president the interview was going to start at this time, and he's kind of a person who processes time monochronistically, he wants things to start right away.
Mhm.
In our culture, we're a little bit more polychronistic, right?
Mhm.
Where the party starts at 10, we show up
Yeah.
10:30, 11 o'clock sometimes, right? But we're okay with that. Could there have been a differentiation between the interpretation of time, which we say are nonverbal communication?
Yeah.
There could have been. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm thinking a little bit too deeply
And
there, but
I
that's
think
a
that's a
conversation
little,
we
that
have.
goes back to the stereotypes about CP time and all that. But I will
Yeah.
say that Southern folks, and I think sometimes things we credit, and this is just my personal opinion, things we credit to Black folks are just Southern folks. The more south you go, the less time matters. If you go all the way down to the Caribbean, time means nothing at all. The further you go up towards New York, the more time matters. So Southern folks, whether they're black, white, or whatever, they think much less about time and dotting the I's or like 15 minutes after, 5 minutes after, as opposed to right on the dot. If you're in New York, time means a lot different than if you're in South Carolina, whether you're black or white. If you're in Miami Beach, Florida, time is a little bit different than if you're in Philadelphia, or if you're in LA. But if you're in the Caribbean now, if you're in the Caribbean or you're traveling to another country, time means even less. So I want to take the time thing
Island
away
time.
from African Americans, because it's not just African Americans. You got
No,
other
it's not.
countries. It's
Even in
not,
Latino
yeah,
culture, Hispanic
yeah,
and Latino culture,
yeah,
they have those jokes too. We have, and there's island time, which we talk about. Now
yep,
we're running out of time. I did want to say, so overall, Derek, how would you assess it? I would say that it was a hit for NABJ. A lot of people thought that the former president played NABJ. I don't get that. I don't feel that. I
no,
feel that it was
no,
good for NABJ to have him on there. It was good for him to expose himself in the way
yep,
that he did.
yeah,
It shows impartiality in a way that the organization is willing to reach out to people that maybe a lot of its members may not politically
yeah,
align with. And
yeah.
so I think it was good. Again, I think it was a positive for NABJ.
Oh
You
yeah.
get the last word on.
There's no such thing as bad press, even for a press organization, right? They handled the welcoming of a former president of stature that may be the next president to their convention without knowing several weeks ago that he'd be part of the convention, which means they had to pivot in a lot of different ways logistically, but also spend a lot more money to accommodate him as well. Because this is all about money too. This is a money thing. When the president comes, then there's certain things that need to happen. You need to have spaces for an additional amount of time. Whatever event that was supposed to happen when he was being interviewed, because it was on the books, months ago, right? That had to be postponed to move to someone else, and that someone else who was staying for a day on NABJ's dime had to be moved over, and then AV people that are getting paid $150 per hour per person had a little bit of a lag time waiting to get access to the facility because of all the Secret Service stuff. So kudos to NABJ for hosting the president. They did a great job. It's a losing battle to try to host them. Larger organizations all over the country try to do the same thing and fail. I think they did just fine. I think it was a great opportunity for the journalists to have interview credentials with the president one-on-one, former president or president, whichever way you want to recognize him. Because how many people can say they had an interview to ask direct questions of the president of the United States of America or former president of the United States of America, much less the very polarizing or Donald Trump, you know? And the thing that's brilliant about him, what did you just mention? People were saying that he played NABJ. Now, who would say that he played him? Like he's, in some kind of way, his weird approach to politics resounds with people and gets some type of positive reaction. Because when you say in our culture, someone played you, that means that they came out on top over you.
They got the upper hand, right?
Upper hand at your expense, right?
Yeah.
So some kind of way, in his stumbling through this interview and his offhanded comments and his odd Donald Trump tone and his holier than thou kind of a rich guy talking to a pauper type of condescension. Yeah. He resounded. And let's be sure that you know that for Republicans, they don't need to win over Black America. They need to win over 5% of Black America because the elections are won by 2 or 3%. And, and the 10 to 20% of African Americans that support Democrats and compromise a big chunk of the Democratic Party's ticket or whatever their percentages that they win. They get 48%, they get the whole 10% from African America. If you move 3 of those percent over to the left or just make it disappear, then you're looking at a whole different election, right? So he doesn't need to win over Black America. He needs to win over 5 out of 100, you know, something like that. So it's
but your final word basically is that, you know, NABJ did the right thing and it was good for him to be there. And I agree. I think that it also sets the stage for future presidential candidates of possibly desiring to want to be in front of an NABJ audience to connect with voters, whether or not it's to connect directly with Black America, Black society, or if it's to show that they are disconnected from Black society and they don't really care about it. So I think NABJ, this will be an NABJ convention that will be talked about for years to come. And I want to thank all of you out there for watching the Capitol Press Club Legacy Podcast. We'll see you next time.